Hello and welcome to my podcast. So today I'm going to be comparing 3 different Hamlet movies, and we'll be focusing in on one particular scene, and in this case that scene will be Act 1, Scene 5, which is the scene where Hamlet's father's ghost comes and tells Hamlet of how his brother Claudius murdered him, and tells Hamlet that he must avenge his death by killing Claudius. So, the 3 movies that I will be comparing will be the Mel Gibson version, the Kenneth Branagh version, and the Ethan Hawke version, and I will be telling you the pros and cons of each, and at the end I will come to a conclusion of which one I personally think is the best movie. So, I will be talking about many different elements of each, and we'll basically just kind of go in order, and then at the end I will say which one is the best. So, as far as scenery, in the Mel Gibson version, well, first of all, the tone I personally find in this scene would be suspense. So, in Mel Gibson's, they do, I find, establish that feeling the most accurately, and have the most accurate representation of what I would assume Shakespeare's vision would be, I suppose. And while I'm actually only able to view a quite short clip of that scene, I immediately I was at the edge of my seat, and I was feeling kind of a fear, because it's very dark, and I find that it's difficult to see the ghost, which kind of adds to that suspenseful feeling. And it also takes place in, I believe, the battlement of Elsinore, which is the castle, in the late night. I also enjoyed that they had the sound of wind blowing as well, because that added some tension to the scene. In Kenneth's version, it seemed to take place out in the woods outside of the castle, and also during the late night. I found that the use of trees helped it to feel more suspenseful, as it kind of made it harder to see where the ghost might be or where Hamlet is, and it's kind of going really fast as you see Hamlet running, and it's kind of difficult. You don't know where the ghost is going to be. However, I didn't like the fact that they kind of, as the ghost was talking, they would include scenes of what he was talking about, but they kind of distracted me from what the ghost was saying, and the way that the character portrayed it almost seemed kind of comedic, which I personally didn't find to be effective, because it kind of almost was making fun of what was going on, so I personally didn't really understand that. And then in Hawke's version, the scenery, I found the setting to be quite disappointing, which kind of becomes a theme with this movie. It seems to take place in what I assume to be Hamlet's room, which is completely unlike the play. I also found the use of modern technology. They had, computers and TVs. It kind of made it seem less like Hamlet and more like some sort of odd modern teen movie or something like that. And I don't feel like I'm watching Hamlet. I don't like the fact that they made it a modern movie and combined it with Hamlet. I feel like you have to choose one, or else it doesn't really work, in my opinion. So for costumes, for Hamlet's attire, I think it fits the setting, because, it takes place a long time ago. He seems to sport a quite traditional outfit, and this is very similar in Branagh's version. They both kind of are sporting quite, traditional outfits that I think work pretty well. And the ghost also is wearing quite a traditional outfit as well. So I just really think it just kind of fit what you would think Hamlet and the ghost would wear. But in Hawke's version, the ghost wears a tuxedo and kind of, modern clothing, which I didn't really think fit. And we'll get into makeup and more of his appearance later, but I didn't find the tuxedo to really work, especially since he's supposed to be a king. It didn't work for me. And it's Hamlet, even though it was a more modern outfit, it didn't really distract from the scene or anything, so I found it wasn't that big of a deal. So for props, I liked the use of a sword that in Mel Gibson's version that he was using, as it really shows his fear, because he's kind of looking around ready to protect himself from the ghost, and I found that was effective. In Kenneth's version, I found that the use of a sword, he also used a sword, was effective, and it was used for them to swear to Hamlet that they would never tell what they saw, and I thought it really just made sense with the scene, and it kind of made it more suspenseful, as it was a sword instead of something else. A sword is a weapon. It kind of made it more suspenseful. And the ghost in Ethan Hawke's version, he seemed to carry some sort of white cloth-like material, and he holds it up to his face. I'm not exactly sure what the symbolism was with that, and to me it wasn't that effective, but I'm not exactly sure what it was supposed to be showing, so maybe if I did, it would be better. So for makeup, I found that the sadness of the ghost in Mel's version made him much more fearsome, and I think that the others were kind of trying too hard to be scary, I suppose. And although the ghost in this version is lacking makeup, to make him appear more like a ghost, I believe that they kind of use this technique to make him appear more like he did when he was alive. And I suppose this could be a letdown, but I can see what they were trying to get across. In Kenneth's version, I found that the eyes that they used were a little too much personally, because he wore some contacts, and I just thought that was a little too much. Again, it almost seemed like that scene was comedic, and I didn't think that that would be what Shakespeare would want, although obviously I'm not sure. Just to me, I personally wasn't a huge fan, and I just think even like he seemed very pale and white, and I just think it was a little bit too much. Possibly you could go kind of between Mel Gibson's and Kenneth's version to create, the perfect ghost, but I just thought there was a bit too much in that. And in Hawke's version, the ghost doesn't really look like a ghost at all either. But in Mel's version, the ghost hardly wore any makeup, but there was still something unsettling about the way like it spoke and everything. But in Hawke's version, I didn't really feel any fear. And Ethan Hawke didn't seem to wear any makeup either, and neither did the Hamlets really. I mean, I'm sure they wore a little bit just to accentuate certain features, but nothing to enhance the character, I don't believe. So for the lighting, obviously in Mel Gibson's, it was taking place in the later night, which is how it was set in the book. And the darkness, once again, adds to the suspense. And like I said, it kind of envelops the ghost in the darkness. And I thought that was just made it more fearful. In Kenneth's, once again, it is also late night, but you can clearly see everything that's going on kind of from the moonlight. In Ethan Hawke's version, while I understand that it's set in the modern day, the entire scene, it's kind of lit up by lights within Hamlet's room, and I just kind of found that kind of bland and much less suspenseful. Although you can see out the window and it is dark outside, I just didn't think I don't know, I think it needed the darkness to be more like Hamlet. For sound, like I said, I enjoyed in Mel's version the sound of the wind blowing, but once again, there wasn't too much. I couldn't watch very much of it, so that was really all I got from it. In Kenneth's version, the wind was extremely loud, and that kind of made it like it was coming to a climax or like ahead of everything, and that I thought was quite effective. And I did enjoy that. Although at certain points I couldn't quite hear, but I feel as though the director was going for that. So, I did think that was a good choice. And then in Ethan Hawke's, there isn't very much sound besides their voices. And I suppose maybe they were trying to add suspense within the silence. Because, people say like how silence speaks 1,000 words or whatever. But I didn't think it worked too much just because everything else was kind of lacking, which made the fact that they didn't have sound also kind of not work. So for performance elements, for acting, I found that Mel Gibson's version is quite similar to Kenneth's in terms of their anger. But Mel also portrays a sort of sadness and fear that I find Branagh lacks in his interpretation. He speaks in varying dynamics, Mel does, both loud and quiet, which adds to the suspense, especially when, you almost have to strain your ear, but it works. And the quiet phrases make me feel as though he's fearful or trying to figure something out, which kind of make me relate because I kind of am feeling the same way. And I could also tell when he was angry because his voice would be raised. And again, when he was quiet, I could sense the sadness he felt. And the ghost acting in Mel's I thought was excellent because he also seemed afraid, and I feel like the others were just angry. But I sort of imagined, it would be scary to be a ghost, and I thought it worked. And his voice was quiet and kind of shaky, which alluded to his nervousness and kind of rubbed off on me as the audience member. So in Kenneth's version, I found Kenneth was also quite impressive, but like I said, lacked the fear a little bit that Mel had, because he was mostly yelling through a lot of the scene. And I suppose it could be said that he did this to portray Hamlet as more mad or insane, but I find he just seemed a little more kind of moody and upset rather than insane. And I got the sense that he was more angry with his mother and uncle rather than upset about the fact that his father was dead. But I mean, that is Kenneth's interpretation. It's just not personally mine. But Kenneth is a very good actor. However, he did... So it did work. But the ghost in that version seemed a little too scary and angry. I feel the ghost, once again, would be more like Mel's version. So That's just my opinion, though. He seemed almost like he was trying too hard to be a spooky ghost in the way he sort of spoke like Hamlet. But I mean, again, that's his interpretation. And like, I like the idea, but I just think there should be a bit more of like a midpoint between that. So for acting, Hawke's acting, I like that it sort of brought some sort of like innocence as he spoke very softly through the whole thing. He was very sad, and I liked that. And it was a very interesting interpretation. However, it was not quite how I would picture Hamlet. I think he needed a bit more anger. But his acting wasn't bad, and I don't fault him for it. For his interactions with his father, I found them to almost be more kind of robotic and lacking emotion, especially when they went to hug. It was sort of just choppy and awkward as they awkwardly kind of paused for a minute before making contact. And I didn't think there was enough emotion in the ghost. He seemed kind of, once again, robotic, and his voice didn't waver anything. He just sort of seemed, I don't know, it was almost like he was numb, and that I didn't think quite worked. So for nonverbal gestures, in Mel's version, I liked Hamlet's facial expressions. You could really see the fear in his eyes, and I liked how he moved around with his sword ready to attack, like I said. And I liked the fact that the ghost was sitting, kind of showed his weakness and fear. In Kenneth's version, the ghost appears to be extremely angry, and they portray this by going close up to his mouth as he speaks. And I kind of found this to be weird and distracting me, and I don't know, I didn't think it was very effective, and once again, it almost seemed comedic, and I don't know why. I'm not sure. I mean, I think that sometimes Shakespeare, in Hamlet especially, does try to be comedic, but I'm not sure if he was trying to in that particular scene. And I don't know if that was what they were going for. Just to me, it seemed slightly like they were trying to be that way. And it also focused, though, on Hamlet's eyes at certain points, and I thought that worked because of the fear that I could see in his eyes, so, that made it seem more fearful. It was just the close up on his mouth, I wasn't exactly sure, so maybe for the ghost they should have gone in on his eyes as well instead of his mouth, and that would have worked better. In Ethan Hawke's version, the ghost goes towards Hamlet and places his hands on his head and speaking directly to him very angry and loudly. And I believe that they use this to kind of show that Hamlet is very vulnerable towards his father, as he just kind of sat in fear while his father spoke to him like that. So I thought that was quite effective. So now to tell you which one I thought was the best. And obviously I feel like you can tell I thought Mel Gibson's version was the best based on everything I said. As I said, he just really, the acting was the main, because that was the main thing I was really looking for. If they were lacking a bit in like costumes or makeup, that didn't matter as much to me. It was really the acting. And I thought that the acting in Mel Gibson's was like just superb. Both of the actors really got across what I would picture Hamlet or the ghost to be like. So overall, that would definitely be the best version of the movie to me, with Kenneth Branagh's coming at a second and Ethan Hawke's at a third, as I wasn't very impressed with that movie. I think it would more appeal to maybe younger audiences who aren't quite familiar with the works of Shakespeare. So, in conclusion, that is my podcast. I hope that you enjoyed, and thank you very much for listening.